Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about episode 7 of Sweet Tooth. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I really appreciate this episode cutting back and forth between the past and the present and just kind of giving you an idea of just everything coming full circle knowledge-wise. Because obviously we start off with Pubba, or as we learned his name is Richard, and kind of learn to find, we start at the beginning where in Alaska, apparently, where we see the birth of the virus. We see where it was found and discovered, and this goes to Fort Smith. And I was about to say, I was like, isn't Fort Smith, it looks like it's the I'm not sure. I was about to say, is that the symbol for the last men? I wasn't sure. But regardless, I figured like, Fort Smith, and it's being sent to Essex City, which I was like, Essex City ended up being the foundation of everything because that's where all these storylines are converging. But the fact is that we got introduced to Richard. I was like, oh, you work at Fort Smith, but it's like, oh, you're not I was like, oh, you're a scientist. It's like, no, he was a custodian. So I was like, oh, interesting. So he was just kind of doing his job day in, day out, working on some drawings. And then we find out how he met Birdie, a.k.a. Gertrude. He met her because she was a scientist at Fort Smith, and then you're like, okay, so this is what, because at first I'm like, they're kind of slowly hitting it off, because obviously they like bond over like the Grateful Dead, and I'm like, at first I was like, wow, did it really kind of quickly build up from here into you guys had your life or whatever? It's like, no, it's interesting, literally, and they end up talking about it later on, because like, oh, they end up breaking into the lab and everything, but it's like, she's like, what, he's like, oh, this isn't how I thought it'd play out. She's like, what, you never thought you'd break into a lab on a date? And he's like, whoa, this is a date? It's like, this is a crazy ass first date. The fact is that like all of this went down on your pseudo first date, but obviously they got to know each other a little bit. But basically, she wanted to discover a virus that they had never discovered before, because I think for her, it's like, if we take the viruses, with microbes in general, there's the bad ones and then there's the good ones. The bad ones that make us sick, and there's the ones that make us better. Those are the ones that go into vaccines and stuff. I haven't even talked about it the entire review, but it is a thing of I'm curious how is this going to make people feel. Granted, yes, this was already a pre-existing comic book prior to everything going down, but still, I mean, I don't know if people really think too much about The Walking Dead at the time of this, even though you've had The Walking Dead and Fear the Walking Dead kind of going down at the same time as all of this. So I don't know if that's really struck a nerve. This in particular kind of has, but I mean, there's been, I don't know, just something I never really thought about too much. I mean, I thought about it, I just never brought it up during the reviews. Just, I have a lane of separation. Plus, where the state of the world is in certain regards, maybe it makes people a little bit more okay, but it might be still too close to home. I'm just curious, what people's thoughts on that would be. Like I said, I could do a little separation in my brain between reality and fiction. It's just an interesting parallels you can kind of draw in some cases. Not a lot of cases, but just some. But getting back to the point, she wanted to find this rare virus, because I guess for her, it's like, if we can, turn this into a vaccine, we'll probably turn it into a vaccine for a lot of other illnesses that exist in the world. So for her, she just wanted to try and do some good. Once again, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So, but obviously the project she was working on was stolen. Well, she was transferred off because the military found out what she was up to, and it's like, oh, we're kind of taking this project from, well, at least her bosses or whatever, the people, the higher ups are like, no, you're getting transferred. Someone else is going to take over this. I'm assuming it's the government found out what she was up to and was like, no, we need to kind of occupy this. So, But nevertheless, Birdie ends up inviting Richard over to her house, and I thought that was fascinating. Especially, she's like, oh yeah, come in, I'll give you some hot chocolate. And she's like, yeah, don't tell anyone, but I have a bit of a sweet tooth. I'm like, that's actually so interesting, because obviously Gus has it as well. So I was like, okay. Also, interestingly enough, if you go back to episode 5, he drunk a cup of hot chocolate in that dream sequence where he ran into his Pubba, or Richard. And I was like, that's fascinating. So that was kind of foreshadowing that in that regard. I'm like, oh yeah, that's kind of a little bit of thing that she's kind of all about. The fact is, he dreamt that, because his dad didn't mention much about it. He doesn't know much about his mom, so I don't think that's something he could have been on some level, that came through on some level. Even though he was a baby, there was something there that kind of came through, like, you know, the bond between them or something like that. Or just like she was his mom in certain regards, and not another. Well, that's the whole thing itself. Like, obviously, present day, you know, you have Bear and Tommy talking about, like, right, they're excited and everything, like Gus is excited, but for them it's a thing of eventually we're gonna have to break the news to him, because what if we go to his mom's place, she's dead or worse, and you know, because even Tommy's like, yeah, but it's like, it's just a situation of they don't want to break his heart, you know? It's like, he's hopeful for the best, but you also have to, you know, it's like you and me, you know, because Bear's like, you and me, we're used to, like, heartbreak and disappointment just because we're old enough to know that. But Gus, like, he's only had, like, one bad thing happen to him in his life, and that was losing his Pubba, but he's held on to this hope of finding his mom after that. Like, it made, like, he never had to stay too sad about, I mean, to be fair, he had to keep going after losing his dad, so, but, like, finding his mom, like, gave him renewed purpose. It gave him something to focus on. It's like, right, I could get to Colorado, I can find my mom, and at the very least, I might have lost my Pubba, but at least I'll have my mom at the end of the day. But, so that's all he's kind of been focused on. So it's like, if do we break it to him? And obviously Tommy's like, well, we are going to have to have that conversation. I'll try to be gentle, which Bear's like, you gentle? No. Because for her, it turns out like, because it's like, well, at the end of the day, he can at least go with you. He'll be safe. And it's like, she's like, well, he's like, was anything you said true? She's like, yeah, I believe the army, the people that, you know, I guess they're kind of basing themselves, the animal army kind of based themselves around, like people who are, I don't know whether she was necessary. She might have been referencing the preserve and everything. So it's like, right, I don't know where they are. They're somewhere. I was hoping that I'd come here and find them, but which we already know, like the preserve is already getting raided, and obviously, like Amy sent everyone away last episode, so we already know that circumstances. They're just unaware of everything. So, so for her, it's like she didn't really had a plan. She was kind of hoping Tommy had a plan, but neither one of them does. So they're just flying by the seat of their pants of like, and here we are. So we'll just have to figure something out. So they make their way to Birdie's house, but Birdie isn't there. The moment the lady answers the door, is like, Judy? And yes, it's Judy. And she talks about the fact that she was hurt and kind of left for dead. But Birdie came back and took care of her, and it's like they stayed there for a while until Birdie left. She left 10 years ago to go and try and find Gus. Because it's also like, oh yeah, this is my Pubba. And she's like, Richard Fox. Is like, you knew my dad? It's like, yeah. But then it was like, obviously there was a lot she wasn't saying. And so she just gave them a key. It's like, your mom left this for, if anyone were to come and try and find it, it goes to the attic. Go ahead. But immediately hearing Fort Smith, Tommy and the Bear look at each other like, doesn't that name sound familiar to you? She was like, I was about to ask you the same thing. She's like, rumors are that's where the virus all started. And it's like, oh boy, and here we are, like trudging along, finding our way to the truth. Like I said, cutting back and forth with like a, you know, because Birdie had gotten news at her house about the fact is that that the military was coming to take over her project, and obviously it was so devastating because it's like, considering what the virus is and everything, like because she knew that if they got their hands on it, they would most likely weaponize it. She knew that, so that's probably like what her biggest concern was. And you know, Richard was like, hey, I have keys as a custodian, so I can get us in there. She's like, you don't have to do this. He's like, yeah, come on, this is the most exciting thing I've done. Like, this has been the most exciting night of my life. So he helps her kind of break into the labs and stuff like that. And then we get the reveal kind of in the attic, looking through some of the stuff. It's still that thing where Bear and Tommy are like, maybe we should we break the news to him? Like, yeah, we need to talk to him. But obviously he finds a photo of Birdie. He's like, oh, like, and it's her and her dad. He's like, oh, I have a grandpapa, you know? But also there's files and stuff, and one says Gus. It's an acronym. And at the same time, we find out, you know, the government is after what she created, and that was Gus. So Gus isn't their biological child. That was an interesting reveal, because I was like, no, like, are they... I mean, her being a scientist should have been a clear sign, too, but it's like, I was kind of just thinking, like, oh, like, it's... Because the fact is, he shares so many qualities. He has her sweet tooth. Not less it was her own... Like, maybe she is his mom to a certain extent. It could be, like, maybe she experimented on her own DNA. Like, maybe she was that desperate, like... I mean, I don't know, like, so, because, like, it's just interesting that he just happens to share some qualities where he has an extreme sweet tooth. I don't know, not unless that's a deer thing. Not unless deer just naturally have a sweet tooth or something, but I'm assuming, plus the whole hot chocolate thing, it makes you think like, no, like there's definitely something there. There's a deeper connection. Regardless of whether that's his biological mom or not, and that ends up being a conversation. It's like, it doesn't take away the fact is that they both loved him, you know? I mean, if he didn't love Gus, he wouldn't have spent the last 9 years looking after him, taking care of him. Like, even though, like, he just met Birdie and she kind of thrust this upon him. Like, hell, they hadn't even had their first kiss. They were about to, but it got interrupted. It's like, once again, crazy first date. Like, all of a sudden went from 0 to 100, and it's like, we didn't even kiss and I already got a kid, you know? You know, I never even brought that up too. I should have, like, you know, it being Will Forte and him being on a show called The Last Man on Earth. I never brought that up, but I was thinking about it, but it's another thing I just never brought up to the reviews. I should have, but regardless. Obviously very different characters and very different, well, somewhat different circumstances. I'm aware of the show, I just never watched it. It's a show I'm planning on at some point in time circling back around to. But nevertheless, it was just kind of in the back of my mind just now. But to learn, like, right, he was an experiment, because it's like, wait, I don't have a mama or a dad. And then Bear's like, okay, I'm adopted. And he's like, what does that mean? And, you know, Tommy has to break it down like that. Her parents didn't make her, like, other, like, normal, how kids are normally born. So it's like, you know, it's like, don't ask questions you don't want the answers to. And he's like, tell me. And Tommy's like, it seems like those scientists created you. Like, because for him, he's looking through those pictures. He's like, where's my papa? Where's my papa? He only sees his mom, but who are these other people? What are these two? So it's like sick, and now it's like, for him, his entire world was flipped upside down, because it's like, wait, my mom and my dad aren't my mom and dad. Like, the fact is, knowing that his dad has lied to him the entire time. And that's the thing of, like, you know, for him, it's like, you know, the narrator brought it up in the first episode. Some truths are harder to talk about. Some answers, like, because at that point, Gus started asking a lot of questions, and it's like, he didn't want to, like, would it have been better to tell Gus the truth from the beginning? I don't know. He was super young. But, like, you know, obviously, Richard didn't want to take that away from him. He didn't want to take away his innocence, you know? And so he probably was hoping he'd have more time to explain things. But sadly, Gus had to find out like this. He didn't have Birdie or Richard there to kind of walk him through everything. He just had to kind of inadvertently find out on his own. And I guess Judy knew in that moment. She saw Gus and everything, and it's like, oh, mom and dad, and it's like, okay, so he doesn't know the truth. Like, Richard never told him the truth of everything, so she probably left it up to him to kind of discover, you know, what's what. Which is heartbreaking in its own right. Especially going back to it, though, Birdie leaving Gus in Richard's hands, because it's like, I need to go back and destroy my research, because if they get their hands on this, millions of people could end up dying. You know, he's like, I don't know anything about babies. She's like, I don't know anything about saving the world, but she's like, I will find you when this all said and done. So we do know she eventually came back because Judy said so. So she probably wasn't able to. She was probably able to destroy all of her research, but it still didn't stop them from acquiring the virus. Like, maybe they tried to weaponize it, and then it ended up getting released, and hence why we got the big crumble like we did. Something that started off with the best of intentions. She even said, like, oh, like, all hell could break loose, and all hell ended up breaking loose, even before it officially ended up breaking loose. So, which is so interesting. Maybe that's why General Abbott is so adamant about fixing all of this, because he's the one that, maybe he was the one that was in charge of, like, the military sent him out to handle all that, so he was the one that acquired the virus. Maybe he was the one pushing the weaponize it, maybe, or maybe someone higher above him was wanting to weaponize it. Maybe he was the one saying, like, we shouldn't do that. We don't know at this point in time, but obviously Abbott's got to be connected in some shape or form to all of this. So to know that, you know, this all potentially started, like, that also is what makes Gus so special, because it seems like he was the first hybrid born. Because obviously before even the others were eventually born, he was the first one that was made. So I think, once again, it kind of begs the question, I guess the others were naturally born, that people did give birth to hybrids, but he wasn't born, he was created. And so I guess that's what makes him special, being the first series. I guess he's kind of like a pure hybrid, where everyone else has kind of got muddled, like, DNA maybe because they were born. I don't know, because they've never made that. I mean, once again, we saw all those different babies with, like, But I would assume it's just that, yeah, those were all the babies that were kind of born at that point in time, not unless the virus modified them after they were born, and then it's like, oh, the virus mixed in the air, and then they got modified. I'm assuming they came out modified. We don't know. We never got that. The moment we came into the room with Adi, they were already all changed, so... Like I said, it's the sad truth that kind of, and the narrator kind of talks about it, kind of put you in a dark place because of that moment. Like I said, what Gus had held on to, what was his shining light, because he had talked about it with Tommy and Barry. He's like, I get it. You guys had kind of given up hope. He's like, I heard your conversation, but just because you've given up doesn't mean I have to. And in that moment, all that hope is broken. His heart is broken because to find out his family isn't what he thought it was. But to be fair, family isn't always who gave birth to you. It's who looks after you, who cares for you. And Birdie cared for him because she never wanted him to be experimented on, so she wanted to get him out of there. It's like, you aren't just an experiment. You are something special. You are someone special to her, so, and you are to your Pubba. Like, he raised you all these years. Like I said, if he didn't care, he wouldn't have done what he did. The situation, was kind of thrust upon him. It also explains, why he's also, so good at fixing things, because he's like, oh, yeah, I'm pretty good at fixing things, so, that's why he was able to kind of, create the home and everything that he was able to kind of create for them, so... that might mean Gus is a special case when it comes to the hybrid. He might be the missing piece to the puzzle, because any data that was about him in particular, because he was the first one at the time, she destroyed all her research, so everything probably rests in Gus. Maybe there's something special in his DNA. Maybe he is the Ellie of the situation, as I've kind of referenced before, that maybe he is this special type amongst the special types, But it might be a situation where it's like, right, if we're going to make a cure, we're going to have to use everything he has, so we are going to kill him in a process. If we could, to make enough of a cure for the entire world, he'd probably have to be sacrificed in the long run. Maybe that's kind of what they're getting at, but yeah. Well, to be fair, now I'm sitting here thinking about it. She obviously didn't destroy all her research. It's still there at her place. I guess they just either they never knew where Birdie lived. Well, I guess, she came there after the fact with her research, so they've never been able to find it. I guess it's just they thought it was lost because maybe she destroyed a lot of the digital copies but kept some of the physical ones or something like that. I mean, the last men are separate from I'm sure some of them are government, military people, but, so that's probably why they probably aren't correlated, because they're probably like a militia group kind of born from it, some military people, but other people just wanting to, fight to save the world, just soldiers in their own right. So it might be a combination, or maybe they are just fully a military group, ex-military people formed, the last men. Who knows? It might actually be a combination of Gus and her files that might be what's the missing piece for Adi to end up finding, the cure. That still doesn't 100% explain how. Richard had that vial on him the way he did when he went to confront that guy, the same one that General Abbott has. It's that never explained how he got that, because we now know it's oh, you weren't a scientist, a part of all of this. You were there, but you were as a custodian. So it's how did you, not less, because he got a whole bunch of supplies and stuff like that, but not less he got that from, Birdie's place, or Birdie left that for him or something, or maybe it was in the car. And maybe it's right. Maybe he looked, maybe there was some notes and stuff left that he was kind of reading over and stuff like that. Which is, once again, kind of crazy, because he held on to that picture of Birdie, but that's mainly because Gus was holding on to it. So that anytime he's looking at it, it's right, this is a woman I'm kind of into, but the woman I literally met for, I saw her from time to time, but I only met her, really got to know her that one time. And so it's probably for him, it's right, she never came to find me and Gus, so probably in his mind she was gone, because that's why he said it, because I was if she was alive, it's because if she was alive, she would have come and found him by now. So for him, it's the fact that she had must mean that she was gone, which might not be the case. Judy doesn't know where she is, and obviously Richard didn't know where she was. So either the last men have her, so she's working on this cure, and maybe when we catch up with Addie and Rainey, maybe they're going to be with her potentially. We don't know. Or maybe Birdie's just somewhere out there in the world on her own, and she's still looking for Gus. Maybe she's kind of going from place to place, still looking for him. Quite a bit of this story we still are kind of missing. Some story points and beats for. But I don't know if we're gonna get all that in like the finale. I don't know. Because the next episode's the season finale, so we'll ultimately have to wait and see. But I'm really curious to ultimately see where all of this takes us, because I don't see all of this I mean, I'm sure all these storylines are converging, but I don't see all those convergences kind of coming to a conclusive enough ending. Like, I'm sure like season finales will leave stuff open, but I don't see things kind of wrapping up enough. Like, I still see, because the next episode is going to be the aftermath of everything Gus has learned this episode, so where that will lead him next, because it's like, is he going to still want to look for Birdie, even though she's not his mom? She did care for him, she did create him and stuff like that, because he has like vague memories of her being like, oh, Gus, like, like when he was in the tube and everything, and after being created, like he still has vague vague memories that started popping up of that. But maybe he won't. What's he going to do next? What are they all going to do? Because they had nothing planned beyond this. They weren't sure. But I'm sure for Tommy and Bear, being beside Gus right now when he needs them the most is the most important thing. Like, what we do next, it's whatever we choose, but it's got to be something, probably a choice they're going to have to make together. Maybe Judy will kind of fill us in on some of the other details I was saying that we were kind of missing. So I'm very excited to see where the season finale takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.